Last year, I was fortunate enough to take a vacation with my family to Hawaii. And of course, my number one thing I wanted to see was Pearl Harbor. I've been to tons of historical sites in Europe and America, but Pearl Harbor has always been number one on my bucket list, especially since I had several close family members who served in the Pacific Fleet during World War II. What surprised me was what ended up being the most memorable part of my visit. We visited the USS Arizona Memorial, and we went on the battleship Missouri. We also went to the Aviation Museum, which has a really cool flight simulator that you can try out. But everyone's favorite exhibit was the Pacific Fleet Submarine Museum, and more specifically, getting to tour a World War II submarine, the USS Bowfin. Walking through the extremely tight corridors of the 312-foot Bowfin and seeing how little space its 80-man crew had to work with was astonishing. There were even sleeping racks in the torpedo room, inches above the torpedoes. Let's just say it's definitely not for the faint of heart, and definitely not for the claustrophobic. It takes a special breed to work on one of these submarines. The submarine, or different versions of submersible vessels, have been around for a while. In 1620, Cornelius Drebbel, a Dutchman in the service of King James I of England, designed this submersible vessel. His device used oars to steer. It was highly advanced for the time, using a barometer to measure depth. In 1776, America built its first version of a submarine, named the Turtle. It was a small design and made use of a screw that was intended to bore holes in the hull of the enemy ship. Submarine development took a giant leap forward in the second half of the 1800s. In 1863, the French built the first submarine, which did not rely on human power propulsion, instead using compressed air. During the American Civil War, the Confederate H.L. Hunley was the first submarine to sink an enemy ship, the USS Housatonic. The H.L. Hunley was equipped with a spar torpedo, which was a copper cylinder filled with gunpowder that attached to the submarine bow by a 16-foot pole. The torpedo would then be rammed into an enemy ship, detonating the torpedo and sinking the ship. Although successful in its mission, the Hunley and its 8-man crew were never seen again until its wreckage was recovered in 1995. The obvious theory of the cause of the sinking of the sub was that due to its proximity to the torpedo when the explosion occurred, it crippled the vessel and/or crew. The Submarine Explorer, built in Brooklyn in 1863, was the first submarine to have some modern features. First, it could dive over 31 meters deep, or just over 100 feet, way deeper than any other submarine had dived before. Pressurized air was used to help control the depth of the sub, making the crew susceptible to decompression sickness, which was unknown at the time. It is believed that the Explorer ascension rate was 1 foot per second, or a rise to the surface in just under 2 minutes. After the ascension, all the men in the crew would develop severe fevers. There were still a lot of kinks to work out. After trying out steam for a little bit to power the submarines, electric battery technology, with the addition of combustion engines, had made propulsion systems in submarines far more reliable in the 1880s. Diesel was used when the submarines were on the surface, which charged the batteries that were used when the vessel was submerged. This is the same time that torpedoes would start showing up on submarines. The submarine Abdul Hamid, built in England for the Ottoman Navy, was the first submarine in the world to fire a live torpedo underwater in 1888. By the start of World War I, all the great powers had submarine fleets which would play a pivotal role in the war, particularly the German subs, which they called U-boats. The sinking of the British passenger liner Lusitania by a German U-boat, which resulted in the deaths of over 1,000 people, including many American civilians, contributed to the United States' entry to the war. Germany's tactic of attacking any ship, including neutral vessels, without warning, was called unrestricted submarine warfare. Submarines played an even greater role in World War II due to improved technology, allowing for longer underwater operations and more potent weaponry. The Germans put a large emphasis on submarines, constructing 1,162 U-boats during World War II. The German U-boats equipped with deck guns, torpedoes, and mines were highly successful in destroying merchant ships in the Atlantic. Life for a sailor on a German U-boat during the World Wars was a tough one. Inside the dimly lit, cramped submarines, sailors couldn't shower or even change their clothes during patrols that could last up to 2 months. 50 men would share 2 toilets. U-boat crews inhaled a lot of diesel fumes, among other things. Mildew would blossom on their shoes, and charts even rotted from the oppressive heat and dampness. During both World Wars, German U-boats sank around 8,000 merchant vessels and warships, killing tens of thousands of people along the way. They patrolled the entire Atlantic. Most people don't realize how close the German U-boats came to the American shores. They patrolled not far off the coast, all the way south in the Gulf of Mexico, just a few miles off the shores of Louisiana, all the way up the east coast to Maine, where a German U-boat dropped off 2 German spies that were tasked with getting to New York and gathering intelligence on the Manhattan Project. The U-boats sank many ships right off the American shores. During the first 3 months of 1942 alone, German U-boats sank more than 100 ships off the east coast of North America. The Germans would use a wolf pack tactic with its U-boats. Once a German U-boat would spot a target while on patrol, they would shadow them and radio to other U-boats in the area. The group of U-boats then would usually try to do a surprise attack at night, so the Allies started using convoys and escorts to help protect ships from the deadly German U-boats. Allied warships would surround merchant and passenger ships, protecting them. There would also be escort aircrafts that were part of the convoy to help patrol the area. German U-boats and their wolfpack tactics succeeded early in World War II until more of an emphasis was put on providing both sea and air escorts all the way across the Atlantic. Also, as the war went on, improved airborne radar helped the Allies find and destroy U-boats more effectively. During World War II, American submarines were mostly deployed to the Pacific. Like their German counterparts, they patrolled the seas looking for any enemy ship, either warships or merchant ships, to destroy, and destroy is exactly what they did. The American submarines, along with some British subs, accounted for a lot of destruction to the Japanese fleet. During the Second World War, the United States Navy used submarines heavily, with 263 of them performing war patrols. During the Second World War, submarines comprised less than 2% of the U.S. naval fleet, but accounted for the sinking of about half of the Japanese ships, including multiple aircraft carriers. American and British subs also contributed to the virtual strangling of the Japanese economy by sinking almost 5 million tons of shipping. The British Royal Navy submarines were smaller and had less endurance than the American subs and were better suited for inshore operations. Royal submarines would work in wolf packs of their own sometimes when attacking targets. Towards the end of World War II, Allied submarines in the Pacific sometimes would patrol for countless days, not finding any targets because the Japanese fleet was so decimated that there were no targets left. While out on patrol, submarines were like hunters quietly walking through a forest. The term silent service is used to describe serving on a submarine because of the stealthy manner submarines operate while beneath the ocean's surface. While on patrol, once a target was spotted, then the crew would move the sub to a suitable attack position and launch their torpedoes and watch the damage unfold through the periscope. Sometimes they would take on fire, so they would have to dive deep to avoid enemy fire and would listen for torpedo explosions, which would signal a hit. They would also have to dive deep if their radar picked up a plane in order to avoid detection. The subs during World War II could stay submerged for up to 48 hours until battery power and air would become an issue, and they would be forced to resurface. The Japanese subs could go down about 300 feet. The USS Bowfin could go down about 400 feet in ideal conditions. The German U-boats could go to deeper depths, with a lot of their U-boats able to go down 700 to 800 feet. Submarines were tasked with other responsibilities, like transporting soldiers for special ops and rescuing downed pilots, including future President George H.W. Bush. Like its German counterparts, Life on an American submarine during World War II was tough. The crew would be out at sea for up to 2 months at a time. Calling it cramped quarters is an understatement. Most men had to share their racks with other sailors, known as hot racking or bunking, as there wasn't enough sleeping quarters for all the men. Most of the racks were in active spaces where other sailors were performing their duties, so there was never a peaceful night's sleep. There was limited hygiene, poor sanitation, and the ever-present threat of an enemy attack. If the submarine sunk for whatever reason, you were pretty much facing certain death. 20% of U.S. submarines ended up on the bottom of the sea floor. Submarine service for many countries had some of the highest casualty rates throughout World War II. There would be long periods underwater with little to no natural sunlight. Often the subs would only surface during the night to avoid detection. When the subs went underwater, the temperature inside would become unbearable. Combine that with 80 men working and breathing, and the air inside quickly became foul. The men knew the air was getting bad when they had trouble lighting their cigarettes. It was a life of extreme confinement and high stress, but the crew usually developed a strong bond due to the shared danger. The Imperial Japanese Navy submarines formed by far the most varied fleet of submarines, including midget submarines. 5 midget submarines were part of the attack on Pearl Harbor. These midget submarines were launched from larger submarines and each carried 2 crew members along with 2 torpedoes. The Japanese didn't have as many submarines as the Americans, and they lost most of their subs during the war. The Japanese even tried manned torpedoes. The manned torpedoes would be launched from a ship. The pilot inside the torpedo would steer the torpedo towards and into the target. Pretty much the same as a kamikaze pilot, but with a torpedo. Even though the Japanese subs had some successes, it was nowhere near the success the German U-boats and American subs had. With all these submarines in the water during World War II, there was only one recorded underwater submarine versus submarine battle in history, where the British submarine, the HMS Ventura, sank a German U-boat, killing all 73 crew members on board. In total, submarines accounted for a massive amount of deaths during World War II, which included a lot of civilians due to the controversial tactic of unrestricted submarine warfare. On January 30th, 1945, a staggering 9,000 people died when the German ocean liner Wilhelm Gustloff was struck by a Soviet sub, resulting in one of the largest maritime disasters in history. In comparison, that's 6 times more deaths than the Titanic disaster. World War II was definitely the peak of submarine warfare, with thousands of ships being sunk. Since World War II, there's only been a few isolated instances where a submarine sank a ship. Like in 1982, when a British nuclear submarine, the HMS Conqueror, sank an Argentine cruiser during the Falklands War. Submarines of today are not as stealthy due to improved anti-submarine warfare technology like sonar, making it more difficult for submarines to remain undetected. The main functions of submarines today are surveillance and information gathering. The subs of today are vastly different than the ones used in World War II. Modern nuclear subs use nuclear reactors for extended underwater operations. Modern submarines are much larger and carry way more sophisticated and powerful weapons, like long-range ballistic missiles. Nuclear subs can stay underwater pretty much indefinitely these days, with the HMS Vengeance holding the record of 201 consecutive days underwater. The first nuclear submarine was the USS Nautilus, launched in 1954. The Nautilus is now decommissioned, and you can check it out at the Submarine Force Museum in Connecticut. I have toured the Nautilus as well. I've never seen a museum that I can pass up. It drives my family crazy on vacations. The Nautilus was still a little cramped, but nowhere near what the Bowfin was like. Thankfully, for submariners aboard these modern submarines, living conditions are much better compared to World War II subs, with better amenities and environmental controls. So if any of you are ever in Pearl Harbor, please remember to stop by and visit the Bowfin exhibit and see firsthand what living on a World War II submarine was like. Thanks for watching. As always, I appreciate it. Please subscribe for more historical videos. Take care.